Hello, my name is Kyle with The Conservative Take, and this video that you're about to watch is a video with myself and Nicole Kaufman recording her new show called Right Therapist on The Conservative Take, and it is her approach to mental health. She's a licensed therapist, and you may have caught her last week, but this is going to be a weekly show. And so just so you know, this particular video has topics that are, let's say, insensitive to certain platforms. So what we've done is we've actually redacted some of the content in this video, but the full video is available to you in its entirety in the links below in the show notes. Just so you know, this platform that we're on right now is a very good platform. It has a big, wide audience, and I want to give her the best chance to grow without letting her shut her down. So go to the link below and support her there as well as here. Go to theconservativetake.com. There will be a section for her as well, the Right Therapist. So with that being said, enjoy this video.
Hello and welcome to The Right Therapist. This is Nicole Kaufman, your licensed therapist, here to talk to you today with my special guest, Kyle Suggs from The Conservative Take. We are here to talk to you about a very special topic today. Going to talk about the mental health effects of masking. And I'm bringing Kyle in to just have a dialogue about that hot topic because it is something that just, look at him, he's masked. Keep your mask on. You're inside and by yourself. So you must have that mask on, Kyle, please.
Oh man.
No. Oh no. You've got it off. I'm
in violation.
Exactly. Thanks for coming on with me today, Kyle.
My pleasure.
I definitely have some thoughts about it. I want to hear your take on masking. What's the conservative take on masking as far as you're concerned?
Well, on the channel, we really haven't talked about it because of YouTube regulations and so forth.
Gotcha.
They didn't want the misinformation. But what's going on with the CDC right now and what's been coming out with the guidelines, it's all over the place. Because I know the Surgeon General, when it first came out, even Fauci said when it first came out. And then, of course, that changed. And now we're loosening that on the federal level, CDC. So I feel that you are free to do what you want. I know back in the SARS days when the world was dealing with it, but not America, people in Japan had the masks on all the time. I was just wondering, why were they doing that? This is in 2018, 2017. And so that's their preference. If that makes them feel comfortable. And it's to me, I think it should be for food and services. It makes sense. So I don't think it's an end all be all, but to mask, people in enclosed locations when they're by themselves, we don't know what to do, and we're just it messes with our heads essentially.
Absolutely. And that's where I come in, right? As the therapist, because it's starting to mess with people's heads. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, whether you are a pro-masking person or an anti-masking person or a whatever it is you feel comfortable with at the time, given the circumstances kind of person. The regulation is definitely all over the board. I think we saw on TV this week, the CDC director, the president, and the vice president, I think were all outside, and one had double masks on, one had no masks on, and then they were all outside at the same time. And it just really begged the question, okay, who's following the policy, much less the science? And so what this prolonged policy flip-flop has done to people is that it's created in their minds what is a mental health term called cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is when you've got two competing ideas that are kind of fighting against each other. Okay. So for those of us who went to college or took biology courses or have a healthcare background or a pretty elementary understanding of science, we may think this way, right? And then we have juxtaposed in some cases against our thought process something that we perceive is antithetical, that it doesn't make as much sense, or it was the policy at one point, but then it changed at a later point. And that, when they fight each other in our head, that is called cognitive dissonance. And what happens with that over time, we can kind of logic model it out in our head. Okay, this makes sense to do in this situation, but maybe not in that situation. So having a mask on inside and when you're in a big crowd, maybe, versus outside when you're by yourself on the beach, for instance. So we use that kind of logical reasoning to risk assess and decide what we want to do when. When we're experiencing cognitive dissonance, we end up with what is called hyperneural activity. Okay. And hyperneural is just a fancy word for your brain being on the hamster wheel. You're constantly thinking, you're constantly kind of in a heightened state of processing and thinking about this. And what that does to people after a while, it kind of wears you out. And show of hands for people who are worn out right now with the back and forth with having to think through this all of the time. Because there's no, as the wind blows, it seems like the goalposts change or the policy changes and or both. So we're trying really hard to make sense of all of this in our heads, and it's constant. And that is what makes people after a while burn out. It makes people just exhausted. And even our vice president the other day talked about the malaise, right? And she actually said the word malaise out loud. And that's a perfect descriptor for what people are seeing, because it's like, does it even matter anymore? Right. And when people give up, when people are like, I'm tired of fighting this, I am tired of just, and it's not even a fight. It's just a imposition of rules and not rules, and then virtue and, but if you don't do it, you're not virtuous, right? This back and forth is like having a bad boyfriend is what it is. It's like, it's hot and cold. It's Jekyll, it's Hyde. We're keeping you safe, but right now, Omicron is 97.3% of the cases out there. So we all have a date with Omicron. It's just a matter of when. So this cognitive dissonance and hyperneural activity is really wearing people out. Are you noticing some of that among people that you speak with, Kyle, or maybe you yourself are experiencing it?
Absolutely. In fact, I was going to talk to you about that hamster, because that hamster wearing himself out, I actually used an image of that in one of my videos dealing with this topic. And I thought that was kind of like over the top, on the nose, kind of like looking for something to put in there for B-roll. But now, you just mentioned it. It totally fits. I guess I got lucky using that image. But yes, people are worn out, and I know myself personally. It's a situation of you don't know when it's going to end. And from my perspective is, when this thing first kicked in a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, however long it was, I was Mr. 14 days to bend the curve. I was on it. I was gloving it, double gloving it, triple masking it, whatever, washing I was going in and out of Walmart with, all that sanitizer stuff, trying to do my part. And then when I realized that I was less doing that, and then you become complacent, and then is that really the place you want your people to be in this country? And even people on like The View and other places now are waking up to, not outwardly saying that they're, well, you just said the malaise from the vice president. Mm-hmm. And also, and The View mentioned it. And so you're seeing pushback from different players like Djokovic. You're seeing pushback from Kyrie Irving. And, and so I'm just wondering, at what point is it going to come to a head? Because people, I think, need to see a light at the end of the tunnel.
They do. And that is what is conspicuously missing right now from the current policy and current social agenda. People do really well when you give them expectations or markers to hit, or a goal to achieve. In therapy, we always talk about, okay, what do you want to get better at? What can we work on right now that you feel like, can really answer the question as to why, you want a change. And so having solid goals to work toward is, just part and parcel for being a self-actualized human being. Right now, we're 2 years into 2 weeks to slow the spread, exactly, and with no end in sight. And now with the current talk of sending even more masks to people to wear, it begs the question, all right, do we just mask forever for a variant right now that by all stats and by all data indications? And so with that in mind, people are saying, but wait a minute, they're really starting to question whether, what exactly is going on here. And so that right there is leaving people in a state of just, they don't know what to do. And when you've got folks who don't know what to do and who are acting erratically, that to me is when, want to get too dark here, but it really, leaves a populace unstable. And to, if you didn't see Kyle and in my show last week, that's when we talked about mass formation psychosis, and it really lays the groundwork for that mass formation psychosis to really begin setting in because of the uncertainty. Human beings don't work well under uncertainty, and we can see this not only in studies with with folks in violence, but we see it in mice, right? When we see mice that are, for instance, given what we called, there's this very famous experiment, and it was called mice utopia. And on one level, mice had to work for their food. They had stimulus. They had mazes and little, mouse treadmills and things like that to play on. And they had to kind of work for their food, and they were only fed a couple of times a day. And by work for their food, there was time between their feedings. In Mouse Utopia, however, there was no stimulus. The food was freely given. It was just out there in general all the time. And the mouse, they didn't have to work for anything. They didn't have to entertain themselves. They didn't have to do anything. They could just basically live in utopia and just relax. And long story short, what ended up happening was the mice below, who had to work and who had, spacing between their feedings, they populated. They mated, they were healthy, they lived, all right? And by lived, I mean this in opposite to the mouse utopia ended up sectioning off. So there were like little cliques and clubs of mice that went to certain areas of the cage, okay? So they actually began to come apart as a group when everything was freely given to them and when they didn't have to work for anything. And I don't mean this as any kind of thinly veiled, metaphor for how our society is. But when you interrupt a society and you're putting in place, it looks like, interruptions, as it were, because we're still not back to normal. Then you get the factioning, then you get the chaos, then you get the increased violence. The mice in Mice Utopia sadly ended up cannibalizing each other, believe it or not. It was really weird, even though they had all the food. that was a strange thing, that even though they had all the food that they could possibly want, they ended up cannibalizing each other. So really strange. But what we see is that when you have expectations, when you have goals to shoot for, when you feel like you have a purpose, all right, that is what, moves society forward and helps us feel good and self-actualized about ourselves. And we've got to find a way, not to be gloom and doom, but we've got to find a way in our daily living now to self-actualize ourselves, to give ourselves a reason, because otherwise, right, we get really kind of, we go down the rabbit hole and we kind of get, kind of meh. We get depressed. We get kind of like, what's the point? This is drudgery. This is just, to have to do this again, without an end in sight. Have you felt that way, Kyle? Or do you know friends or family that, has just been like, shaking their head? They just don't even know what to do anymore.
Yes, I can see that actually with, I won't call out names on this call, but close family members definitely. And I think when you said the whole 2 weeks to stop the curve or slow it down, whatever, that was why I was on board, because there was an end in sight. 2 weeks, I can do that. And I'm a historian, not really a good historian. I'm an amateur historian. But if you look at like the conflicts in the past, the wars are hard because you never know when the war is going to end. And one of the reasons why Lincoln almost lost the Civil War wasn't because he didn't have enough people or the resources, whatever. It was because people didn't know how long it was going to drag out. And it was when he freed the slaves in 1863, Emancipation Proclamation, it took effect that year, 1st January.
Okay.
He did it at 62, but people saw that there could be end in sight because there was a clear goal and reason to fight further, which is why they were going to pretty much lose the war, because Lee was going to basically do it through political means, and that's basically how America won, was through political means. And because the Brits were just tired of fighting. They were tired. It was going on for 8-9 years, and King George III was losing support. And so I'm framing it that way as one thing. And also, you mentioned about the rats or the mice.
The mice.
It's interesting because, they tried the communist experiment back in the 60s with the hippies and, coming together and everything, and that utopian type society. It fell apart because the human condition just wasn't conducive for that.
Exactly. And the very famous Zimbardo experiment, you can Google the Zimbardo experiment. That's when they had the false experiment. It was done in California. It was one of the most famous human experiments ever done, but they recruited college kids to go to jail. Okay, so they had inmates, and then they had a warden, and then they had guards, who all played the go to jail scenario. And what ended up happening was complete and utter chaos and violence, and people had some mental breakdowns within days. And the reason why was that people got power hungry, and then people did not like being told what to do by their peers, and the rules kept shifting and kept changing. And that Zimbardo experiment is one of the most famous, human behavior experiments that's ever been done. It really showed what happens when people aren't given strict parameters to adhere to know a time frame as to when things are going to change. And, when the rules keep changing arbitrarily. And that is one thing that human beings as a whole cannot abide by for very long. They will acquiesce and adjust. Human beings are great at adapting and adjusting. And 2 weeks, that's all we have to do. Awesome. Are we not headed in the right direction? And that's the problem, that places are beginning to question, well, shouldn't we be? And what are we supposed to believe here? The case count? Case count would have you believe that we're all doomed, but we're not. These are cases. These are not hospitalizations and deaths. So for us to now really begin to hone our ability to discern, for us to now be able to think, okay, what really does the data show, and go back to the data. If you haven't watched, did you watch the Moneyball movie? I know you did. You had to.
Yes, I have. Yeah. I watched it within the past year.
Did you? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I probably did too, I want to say. For those of you who aren't familiar with Moneyball, the movie, it's an older movie. I think it came out in 2011, has Brad Pitt in it. So that's one of the reasons I watched it, that and the fact that I love baseball. So there's that. But it really took baseball for me into, and we've always known that baseball is a numbers game, but this takes it to a whole new level.
It's based on a true story, right?
It is a true story as far as I know about the Oakland A's, I believe, right? Yeah. So if you haven't watched it, you'll love it. But one of the most famous lines in the movie is, if he's a good hitter, then why doesn't he hit good? And, those are the questions that we should be asking right now. If masks work, then why aren't they working? Right? So, and I'm not, does that mean to wear one, not wear one? I don't know, but does it seem like they're working? I don't think so, but we've been told that they do, right? So we got to start asking the hard questions, right? And here's the other part of masking. Do you have friends or family, Kyle, that kids are under a mask mandate in their school?
I can only see what I see on Facebook and social media. I would imagine, I don't think where I am that's a mandate, but I'm not quite sure. My kid's homeschooled, so I don't really, and people we hang around who have kids are homeschooled, so they don't do that.
Right.
But I do know around the country there are. I mean, I'm not seeing that.
Absolutely. And it's in pockets. And it's odd. North Carolina, for instance, has 100 counties. And so if you look at it, who has a mask mandate for their schools and who does not, it looks like a patchwork quilt almost of what county is masking. So there may be a masking county right beside an unmasked county. And that just boggles the mind right now, or right there, because we're like, okay, what is exactly the difference? But, the BBC, definitely not a right-leaning entity, put out an article this week that said, yeah, did you like that? I can totally enjoy my voice. I'll do my Kamala Harris next. Okay. So when even the BBC is putting that out, and to your point where you were talking about, even The View is like, wow, we've been, all this kind of stuff. I just can't believe that we got it. I'm just, head exploding that we just can't believe that we still got it after everything we've done. And doesn't care what you do. Right. So, and so now it begs the question, okay, you can twist yourself into a pretzel trying to please, or maybe you can live your life, right? And I'm for mental health's sake, we got to get to a point where we're back and able to feel like we're living our lives and not living our lives under this cloud. And I'm not saying to defy any rules or go out and create mayhem yourself. I'm not fomenting here from a mental health perspective, but I'm saying, it's okay to feel like, okay, we can't just keep running that hamster wheel of trying to get ahead of something that even our officials are having a hard time getting their head around. Would you say that would be a fair take, Kyle, on how to approach this?
Because we're all locked down. I think being locked down is probably the worst part about it, in my opinion, because we can't see our families, we can't engage, and there's no options.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And isolation is punishing, and we have seen that in no clearer fashion than with our children being isolated over the last year from having to be at home, and be educated online, and I use education in air quotes because the results of that are now coming to fruition, and the results of the online education are dismal at best and actually quite harmful in reality. And so, I tell people, get your kid outside, get your kid moving again. Kids are, too plugged in. They're too much on their video games. They're too much into these, that feeling like, okay, well, we can't go anywhere now, or we can't do anything now. And we've had that mindset for a couple of years. Half the country is, I feel like, still living. Now, there's another half of the country, I feel like, that is like, you know what, let's go out and live our lives. We've done everything we can do. Let's move forward. And an equal half that is like, no, we can't be too careful. And that's the slippery slope, is that when we can't be too careful, then you're never going to achieve anything. There's never any most safe, right? There's no the best or the most safe method. There really isn't, because, at what point do we cross that threshold of complete isolation, of taking away freedoms, of taking away choice? And, Americans love choice, and we're a nation based on choice and freedoms. And the minute you start taking that away is when people begin to vote with their feet. And that's what we are seeing in a lot of these blue counties and blue states. A mass exodus in number of people. Texas and Florida have picked up hundreds of thousands of people over the last year that have moved from these states with these strict policies. So we're seeing a seismic shift in population across this country that in my lifetime I've never seen. So it will be really interesting. The South is now the most populated area of the country, writ large. California obviously is the biggest state, but they did lose, I want to say, close to 300,000 people this year due to people just leaving because of policy. So that right there tells you that people will do what they can to escape. What are your thoughts on that, Kyle? Do you think we're getting there?
Well, I hope so. And without putting on tinfoil hat, and removing those possibilities, I think we are going to get there eventually. I think Biden has a good opportunity to take the Omicron off-ramp. That's what Steve Deace calls it, basically saying, with the Supreme Court saying what it said, and now with the Omicron science, everyone agrees that, and, it's, not that you want it, but, it's not as scary as Delta, definitely. And so he could just say, by the way, he moved the actually, Nancy Pelosi probably told him to move the State of the Union address until March, which is the latest we've seen it in our lifetimes. And so the thought is he could easily go up there and say, hey, you know what? It's over. Still maintain your whatever you want to maintain in terms of, whatever you preferably want to do. But we're not going to lock it down anymore. That's over. But you're free to do what you want, but we're not going to mandate any of that stuff anymore in our publicizing, in our statements, or anything else. It's over. Kind of like what Bush did when he said mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished, right?
not hopefully that's the same effect that he'll have, but so that's what he had the opportunity to do. And because besides, also it's an election year, so
absolutely
people are expecting him to do it. Because you mentioned people, they what'd you say with their feet? They
vote with their feet.
Vote with their feet. There you go. So.
Well, he has, our president definitely has the ability to leverage what's happened into his favor and say, oh, well, that now informs policy. And as such, here's what we're going to do. And he could look like a hero instead of a zero, right? And so, and believe me, I wish he would. Please. And as I said last week in our show last week, something good needs to happen. We need to feel like this guy, that our president is on our side and wants things to improve. And it almost seems like he's stuck looking in the rearview mirror, because when you're putting forth a policy of ordering testing and sending test kits to everyone, my gosh, wouldn't it have been great to have? Why are we doing this all of a sudden now? And again, the cognitive dissonance of trying to make sense of this a little too late, it feels like. Yeah, just take the off ramp, dude. I love that. Just take the off ramp and leverage this in your direction. And, you'll probably get a little bit of your voter base back if you do that. I think it would be politically expedient for him to do that at this point. Absolutely. And so, with the Supreme Court ruling yesterday, that really does, I think, put a sigh of relief in a lot of people. Yet at the same time, my understanding is that the policy or the option to enforce that vaccine mandate still lies with independent or private businesses. Am I correct on that?
I didn't read that part of it. But okay. it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. I know it definitely mandated any federally funded healthcare workers, which is pretty much every healthcare worker in the country.
Right.
But that actually. So repeat that. You said that the private can do that. Private
businesses do still have that option. In my. Okay. From my understanding, I heard on the Daily Wire this morning, actually, that there was an employment and constitutional lawyer that said that private businesses still do have the option to do it. They don't have to do it, but they can enforce it. So maybe they will, maybe they won't. I'd be curious if a company does do that, then are they opening themselves up for litigation later? So even though that guy may say that, it still has to be tested, through the court. So absolutely. And as far as most private businesses right now, I would think that they wouldn't want to take that chance of losing more business or being wrapped up in litigation, from now until whenever. And parents, I implore you, if you're doing nothing else at home with your kids, you read to them every single day, multiple times a day. You read with them, you read to them, and you have books read by them to you. Okay. That is the biggest gift you can give any school-age child right now. And even if you've got older kids, buy them books on tape or audiobooks for them to listen to. All right. They need to hear, great spoken language, and reading to them is the best thing you can do from an educational standpoint. All right. Soapbox. I'm on my soapbox. Can you tell? Sorry about that.
I'm just listening. That's wonderful. I mean, you're giving practical advice, tangible advice to people so that we can get through this. And that's what this whole thing's about, is understanding what's going on and giving us help that we can do to help us, feel better about ourselves and what's going on.
Exactly. And I've heard so many adults say, well, I'm not a teacher. I can't teach calculus, and I can't even teach the new, math that they're doing and things like that. Nope, you can't. But what you can do is you can read to your child, and reading. If they can read, they can do math. All right. They have to be able to read to do math. So you can get them right there and know that you are making a huge difference in your child's education. Promise.
Exactly. Promise. And if you can't read or do that, Ben Carson's mother couldn't read.
Correct.
Didn't stop her.
Nope.
She just said, do a book report and bring it back to me. And she just acted like she read it. She couldn't read it. He didn't know.
That's awesome.
And he's a brain surgeon. So it worked out for him.
Yeah, it worked out. It definitely worked out. We can do things that can overcome what's being done that feels like is out of our control. And that's one of them that can have a huge direct impact on your child fairly immediately. So don't discount that. You can do that today. What was your favorite book as a kid, Kyle? What was your favorite book to be read to or to have read to you?
Okay, I had several. Encyclopedia Brown series was awesome because the kids really liked that. Was cool. A book called Herbert by Hazel Wilson. It was back in the 50s. That's a fantastic book. But then my godmother gave me, who was Black, by the way. I'm saying that for a reason, not because I'm trying to be special. She gave me Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer and she was a civil rights kind of person, and it wasn't a problem then. Just so you guys know, Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer. I love those books. So those are the ones I remember. I think about reading growing up.
Very good, very good. I loved Mimi the Merry-Go-Round Cat. That was I just loved that book. I loved having that read to me. Goodnight Moon, of course. As I got older, there weren't enough books for me to read. I read all of the little series books, the Apple series books that you could buy at the book fairs. I loved that. What are you reading right now, Kyle?
Right now, I'm actually trying to get through Jordan Peterson's book, Rules for Life, I think. The 4 Rules.
Nice.
And but I'm actually reading some historical book on George Washington called His Excellency.
Okay.
It's kind of a thick book as well, so I'm kind of getting through that.
Plodding through that, huh?
Yep.
Okay. Very good. Very good. I'm reading a lot in my spare time, I read self-help books because, of course, therapy. Right now I'm reading Women Who Love Psychopaths, and it talks about women who are involved with narcissistic, psychopathic, or borderline personality disordered partners. So
can I ask you a question on that real quick?
Absolutely.
The movie Goodfellas, did you see that?
A long time ago. I haven't seen it recently.
Okay, there's a scene in there where he hands her a gun because he basically, he was a gangster, obviously, and she was getting attacked by a neighbor. And so he goes over there and beats him up, pistol whips him, hands her the gun. This is, suburban woman. And then she said, this is a true story. And she said, you know what? I kind of liked it. She became a mob boss woman, whatever. Okay. So I don't know. I just thought about that.
Hey, what I have learned so far is that 1 in 5 people has a personality disorder. We didn't know that that many people in our midst were dealing with, disordered personalities. And 1 in 100 people is what we call a low conscience human being, or someone who has, definitely gangster type tendencies and could be labeled a psychopath. So it's really interesting when you get to the partners of these people, because they didn't know for so long, or it just didn't register with them that their partners were capable of some of the things that they're capable with. So, yeah. And then sometimes you go along to get along, which sounds like what she was doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show today, Kyle, and assisting and just contributing all of your good stuff and helping this show to be what it is. So thank you for that. All right, everybody. Last week I told you to hug your partner 30 seconds at least. This time we're going to talk to them like, I don't know. We're going to talk to our partner for a second, kind of like we talk to our dog. So when we say, love you, we'll be back soon. Okay, bye. All right. We want to give them, we want to talk and address our partner in a really loving way. So whether it's our kids, our partner, a significant person, we want to throw our voice and say, love you so much. I'll be back soon. And do it in a way that shows loving and caring and cherishing that person. So give that a try and see how your partner reacts. Thank you so much, Kyle.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. You have a good one, okay?
You too.
All right. Take care.